Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Adam Grandt-Nesher. He is Director of Cloud Adoption and Infrastructure Optimization Center of Excellence for the General Services Administration. And we've got Arianne Gallagher-Welcher. She's the Executive Director of USDA's Digital Service. And it's great to have you both with us. And let's set the scene maybe and just tell us exactly what your organizations do in this whole context of digital services and cloud adoption, and they're kind of coming together, I guess, in many ways. Adam, we'll start with you.
Thank you, sir. The Centers of Excellence are a group of federal experts. We work with other agencies across the government to try to help facilitate their journey towards IT modernization. We do this in 6 specific elements: AI and data analytics, cloud adoption and infrastructure optimization, contact center modernization, and customer experience.
Okay, and so you help government-wide, basically, it's fair to say. All right, and GSA itself, too, is that one of the customers?
No, once in a while.
All right, good. And Arianne, tell us about your organization.
Absolutely. So I'm part of the USDA Digital Service over at the Department of Agriculture. Our goal, we are in the Office of the Chief Information Officer at USDA. Our goal is to bring in and deploy multidisciplinary talent teams across the department to really help with some of our biggest technology challenges across the enterprise. We have a lot of really great USDA agencies across over 8 functional mission areas, 29 different agencies, and we work with all of our different tech talent and partners across USDA to really help figure out how do we streamline our digital services, how do we make sure that our systems and our technology are working effectively for all the different types of people that we serve across the department.
Okay, and let's talk about a little bit of history here, because digital services did not get invented last year or even the year before that. In fact, the idea of e-government, dates back to the mid-90s, and you could say maybe the first deployment of a federal website was kind of a digital service, not one as we understand it today. So maybe give us, and again, we'll start with you, Adam, what's different now versus, say, 3-5 years ago in the way agencies conceive of the idea of digital services?
So I've been with the federal government for about 5 years, working across, at this point, about 18 agencies altogether. And I would say that the idea of digital services in government goes even a little farther back than that. We have a lot of older systems from the 70s and 80s that do things like manage benefits and manage payments in and out of the federal government. And a lot of our work 5 years ago was around establishing the necessary ecosystem to start transitioning some of those services into the cloud. As we move towards 22, 23, after the pandemic, we've gotten to the point where most agencies that we work with have already established well-governed, reasonably well-managed digital services frameworks that you can start focusing on specific workloads and transition them into the cloud.
Okay, so the frameworks is the big difference for
yes,
transitioning to the cloud.
Work in, as opposed to creating the space.
Okay, all right. Arianne?
I would definitely agree that government has a different level of maturity when you're looking at setting that ecosystem together for delivering digital services. What I've seen probably over in the past 5 years or so, especially from about 2018 to now, is that there's a really big push for that interconnectedness between the front end, what is the members of the public seeing, how are they navigating with the technology that we're using, and then also connecting it really well to the back end to make sure from A to Z, the whole way the system works from end to end provides that designed outcome that you're looking for a particular user. What I've seen in a lot of agencies is that sometimes it's hard to connect all of that together. So some folks may focus on just the front end in terms of the customer, the public use experience, and then focusing on the back end in terms of how do our support staff and how do our workforce make all the different systems and interconnections work. With a lot of transitions to the cloud, I've seen that a lot of agencies are really looking at how can you really bring that together into one seamless experience so that you can tell from the beginning to the end where are those pain points, where are the things that are going well, and really looking at customer experience not just from the front end perspective of the members of the public, but also on the back end in terms of all the different people that have a touch point to make sure that a loan payment to a farmer gets the check out of the mail at the end of the day, or to make sure that all of those right communication touch points are happening between all the different process points of a grant or application process, for example.
That's probably not a bad definition of modernization itself, is reorienting systems for that CX and then redoing what you do on the back end from a different kind of orientation than you might have had, as Adam said, in the 1970s when it was data processing, you might say.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because, yeah, it's one of those things where, especially at USDA, we have so many different types of services and programs, and it's really hard for the public to navigate and know exactly which place do they need to go to get the answer that they need. And at USDA, we're trying to make sure that that's not something that they need to do, that we're having a lot of our front ends help. There's no wrong front door per se, and that based on what folks are need, we're helping navigating them to where they need to go. And then on the back end, we're using like the human-centered design process to understand, do all these different touch points on the back end make sense? Does it end to that, overall streamlined experience of getting the overall outcome, the check out the door, the application process? And how can we change that back end process and streamline it with the technology that we have to really get to a much more faster, efficient service at the end of the day?
Yeah, so Adam, then that really obviates the cloud, because why would you redo your data center for all that? Nobody has the skill, time, or money. The cloud, it's there already?
So first, 100% agree with you. One of our earlier projects was the Ask USDA framework, which was a beautiful step forward. We like to define ourselves, especially ever since the CX executive order from last year, as we arrive at an agency. Our customer experience center defines what we're there to do. And as we deliver, they're there to measure that we've actually delivered the improvement of the experience to the public, to the federal employee. Everything that we do starts and ends with the customer's experience. The way that we like to look at it, technology, both on the data side and the infrastructure platform development side, serves to facilitate that transition. We can actually sit with USDA's new CX shop, which is fantastic, by the way, and other agencies to absorb, this is what we want the public to experience as they interact with us, and then go back and start deep diving into their infrastructure, into their current application level to suggest what's the best way to get there.
All right. Now, none of these agencies are selling things to the public in the way a retailer is. So customer experience has some nuance to it because there's rules, there's regulations, there's policies, there's a legal framework that's behind this that may not apply to, XYZ retailer online. Maybe it's a good place to start with, and Arianne, you can start here with what are the demand signals you're getting? What kinds of services are the agencies, your customers, desiring from you for their customers?
You're exactly right. So one of the things that there are is, definitely differences between delivering a government service versus, selling a product. What we're seeing is that the expectation, though, to have seamless service during those transactions is still the same. Our CIO, Gary Washington, our big vision with our IT modernization across the department is that when you go to USDA for a product or service, it should be as easy as going to the ATM. You shouldn't need to know which out of 100 doors you need to go through to get to the right answer. You should be able to go and have that seamless experience, have that seamless expectation. Even though we're not selling a product, the product we are selling is a real key service that for a lot of the people that we serve is a critical lifeline for them, whether it's a loan application or whether it's access to a grant for a small or underdeserved group working on a farm. It's really important that we make sure that that experience is there. And so what we're hearing from our demand signals from the public is they want to be able to access those services online. They don't want to necessarily have to go to one of our 4,500 different county offices across the country to get some of the guidance and expertise they need. They also want to be able to start filling out forms digitally and sending them in digitally versus using the mail. So we're having those really strong demand signals from our public that we want to be able to access these services online. We want to be able to access expertise and support that we need to fill out these forms online. And we want that ability to be able to, be accessible to these programs and services no matter where we are. Because especially a lot of these smaller family farms, they don't have a lot of time to travel 2 to 3 hours to their county office. They want to make sure that they understand what programs they may be eligible for and can quickly access those services. So very much like online retailing, we have those demand signals from the public of online, accessible, by default accessible first. This is a big part of the digital experience OMB memorandum in terms of digital first, not digital always. We always have to make sure that we're accessible to all different members of the public and have those in-person touch points when we need to. But the big drive that we're seeing with the members of the public and our customers is very much online. I want to access and do these transactions digitally, just like I do in an online retail marketplace.
Right, so the metric is the percentage, say, of resolution that can happen online, but yet you don't have a black hole. If someone needs to pick up the phone, they still can.
Exactly. It's figuring out, how many of those services can be done online automated. How can a online form be filled out to completion and submitted electronically, and then have those touch points if we need to. USDA, we love working with our members of the public, and we want to try to make those services as easy as possible. And so we're trying to figure out how much can we streamline those 75 to 80% of our basic transactions and services that we do with our customers, so that we can focus our staff time and expertise on those really complicated challenges and problems that you need that lot of one-to-one, face-to-face interaction to try to resolve.
Yeah, and just as an aside, that's an indication of how connected by broadband even rural areas have become.
Absolutely.
Combines are online basically now for whatever GPS purposes they have, and so it's a pretty high-tech environment out there, even in the nation's farms.
Oh, absolutely. Every day I learn something new about a different type or piece of technology that farmers and academics and researchers use all across the country with their work with USDA, and it just continues to amaze me every day, the innovation that is in this space and how folks are using technology to really get food out to all the people across the country and across the world in just in amazing ways, like in just geospatial kind of mapping technology alone, to try to understand how different areas of farms, like what kind of crops are successful in one year versus another, and how they can use that data to rotate their crops to really have those data-driven decision making on how they can be successful at their farms. It's just breathtaking to see that every day, and to figure out how can we at USDA help facilitate that more, drive that more, to get to better outcomes for all of our family farms.
And Adam, you mentioned you've been dealing with 18 agencies in your 5 years. Talk about the demand signals. What kinds of services and for whom are you hearing from the other agencies outside of USDA?
From the perspective of the signals that we're hearing, I would focus on, and it may sound basic, but it is true. In order to facilitate any of that communication or digitization of services that currently exist online, the first and foremost thing that an agency has to do is what we refer to as liberate its data. Data is distributed in multiple data centers, multiple data storage vehicles. Some of them are not as accessible as others. In order to perform an action, to be able to expose a service to the public, we have to either transition that into a shared space or build a mechanism to allow access to that data from any edge points, any one of those multiple front doors. We've done that with multiple agencies. One of them, for example, had about 5 petabytes of DNA data, which was a result of research.
DNA data.
DNA data. This is a HHS sub-agency. There's quite a few of those. DNA that had about 5 petabytes of it sitting in their basement in their office. By law, also for purpose, their job is to make that data available to the public, which in their case means researchers from around the world as they do research against that data. Generally speaking, when you work on government-funded research, all of your output, including your research data, becomes publicly accessible. via this organization in that specific topic. The problem was, since it was sitting in a data center in their basement, that it has to go through their internet connection. Some cases, some researchers would have to wait months to get access to the type of data they needed to.
Even within the agency and within the federal context.
Regardless, there's a line, there's a pipeline, you have to wait until you get a piece of the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
Our work with them was started with data prioritization, basically identifying which data is accessed, how often, and by whom. And then transition to, and this is where we start utilizing cloud services. You have high availability, high frequency access data sitting in equivalent to in-memory storage versus low storage or deep storage data that is accessed rarely and is available by demand over a few days. Transition all of the data to get access to any of that, To get access to any of that, you will need to transition all of the data into the right places in the cloud, wrap it in the correct security to make sure that the type of data is accessed by the right people for the right reason, and then push it out into the world in a nice governed fashion. We can have a much longer conversation about privacy regulation around that, but that is by itself a whole mechanism you have to take into account. This is a not uncommon project for us. For any kind of public-facing process, you need to gain access to your data, however it's stored, and make it accessible to cloud system or even to offline system via the cloud. I want to make an interesting point about your comment earlier about the ability to pick up the phone versus online. Mm-hmm. From our experience, those two are actually the same process. When we, and that's the reason why we have a contact center, modernization center, when we build a modern contact center, it includes the ability to pick up the phone, but these are the same people who would respond to a chat when you're on your phone and you want to chat with them. It also includes building knowledge centers like Ask USDA. So I'll stop referring to it, I promise. That are available both for the public and for the specialists sitting in that contact center. So as we build these online services, 2023, 2024, still the most common face of the federal government are our contact centers, either digitally or otherwise. We've also recently started adding chatbots under controlled situations when they're appropriate. So more and more technology, more and more automation goes into managing that public experience.
And you call it contact center, not call center. I think that's a significant difference.
Yes, and not only, it is the contact center, center of excellence, which is not confusing at all.
Sure, no, not at all. But the idea of that single person, given person in a contact center might also be answering chats gets to the question, we'll ditch to the side here a little bit, about automating that, in which you have intelligent agents powered by AI as a digital service to access those cloud resources. Something you're looking at?
Absolutely. Arianne? So USDA is partnering really closely with our entire department. You know, the executive order that came out on the ethical use of artificial intelligence is something that is on every agency's mind in terms of how do we leverage artificial intelligence responsibly so that we can streamline and automate some of those different services. So at USDA, our senior accountable official for AI, who is also our chief data officer, is working really hard across the department to identify a number of different use cases to test out using AI to see, can that technology really help streamline some of those types of business processes? Because like you said, if we can automate or streamline or make those pieces faster, then we can spend more of our investment and our talent and our skill sets on the more complicated challenges that may come up with a particular transaction or question. So what our agency is really trying to do is work with all of our mission areas and agencies to set up a sort of governance framework, but also start to kind of test some use cases of where AI can be used under a sort of controlled pilot test environment so that we can understand how the technology works, what's working well, what isn't, before we roll it out in a larger scale for a different business process or service. So we're partnering with all of our different agencies like our Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, our Forest Service, understanding where are some of those use cases that they're coming to us saying artificial intelligence could be really helpful in these business processes to try to streamline providing some of that information in a lot of those different back and forth transactions.
Yeah, because you really have to get that right. I think we've all
Yep.
experienced when bots are not well engineered and they just quickly get
Absolutely.
you to a wall and you can tell they've run out of ability.
Yes, we have. Okay, so the AI Center of Excellence has been around for about 5 years. So before the current boom and evolution of the large language model technology, and we have been working on careful and managed implementation of machine learning and other services in a variety of places in the government. One of the things that we do is we partnered with challenge.gov, where we, at this point, I believe we've done 2 of them. I think they're working on the 3rd, where we reach out to industry asking for specific AI-based solution. For example, the most recent one was healthcare, where we offer funding from the government to the winner of the challenge who can show a specific implementation of AI for a specific medical need. We are very gentle about the way we interact with this new technology. Before anything can be responsible for any mission critical function, it has to go through variety of tests. To my knowledge, I've not been involved, or my team has not been involved in a production implementation of an LLM yet, large language model yet, but we've been testing their usage across government.
Wow, yeah, so you need to get it right before you get it out there fast.
Absolutely.
let's say.
Exactly.
Well, Arianne, let me ask you specifically how cloud has played the role in allowing USDA to have digital services where the emphasis is on phone as a last resort and you can solve things beforehand digitally.
Absolutely. So we work with all of our different mission areas and agencies on IT modernization. How do they take their legacy systems and how do they modernize them? What types of systems and platforms enable them to do that? One of our really great enterprise partners at USDA that is a critical linch point to that is our Digital Infrastructure Services Center. They're called DISC at USDA. And they really help all of our mission areas and agencies access enterprise level agreements for cloud and other software as a service and other products so that we're leveraging the buying power of USDA and also sharing and leveraging successes across so that maybe a cloud adoption in food and nutrition service could be beneficial to our colleagues at rural development. So we're trying to have these enterprise systems and teams to help folks understand how we can leverage all of these different types of software, of services from our industry partners to really figure out how do we transfer, how do we modernize that service? What are some of the things that are common between one mission area and another? And there are many, versus also some of the things that may be very specific to that program, to that office based on law or statute. So it's really trying to figure out how can we use our collective power as a department to really move these modernizations in the right direction and get access to all the platforms and services that folks need to do that, not being prescriptive as to how they need to do that, but providing the options that have the efficiencies, that have that service, and have those different examples for agencies to choose from. I think it's one of those areas where I really appreciate the partnership that they have with all the mission area and agencies in terms of they have that overarching view across a department of what different agencies are trying to do, what works well, what doesn't, and then trying to identify as a whole department what are the ways that what we like to say is bring everyone up to the same digital foundation. Because we know, especially the way that funding works for some of our different mission areas and agencies, some folks get a lot of funding for a lot of their different programs and mandates, and then there's maybe some parts of USDA that don't get as many, but still have to have that same digital base, still have to follow those same rules and guidelines. So how do we make sure that whatever we do across a department can be scalable and implemented across to all of our other mission agencies?
It sounds like this DISC unit is something of a broker, but also something of an advisor with knowledge of cloud services.
Absolutely. So they're really there to help our mission areas on the ground understand, what the challenges that they're trying to solve based on, the system they're trying to modernize or maybe the legacy system they're trying to archive or completely build something new. There's a lot of times where bills come in Congress say, hey, you have to adopt this program, and in XYZ year, you have to get this amount of grant money through the door. That can be a really complicated process really fast. So a lot of what our DISC organization does is really try to help understand the problem they're trying to solve, tries to figure out what do we already have sort of in our digital Rolodex of solutions that could be deployed to help meet that need, or what else could we need to bring in at the enterprise level for a mission area or agency to be able to provide that service. One of the things I really value about the agency is that we have our Chief Information Officer at headquarters for the department, and then each agency mission area has an Assistant Chief Information Officer, and that network is really close and a really strong brain power. They get together every month to kind of understand what are some of the different challenges that we're experiencing across an agency, and really try to help figure out from our headquarters perspective, what can CIO and organizations like the USDA Digital Service do to help make sure that every mission area and agency doesn't have to recreate the wheel every time sort of a new challenge or sort of a new modernization effort comes up? How can we leverage the collective across to really benefit everybody?
Yeah, so Adam, that gets to the question of one of the skills gaps that has been cited for IT in the federal government is knowledge of cloud services, which are not the same as if you're running a data center.
True.
How do you help with that in that, again, that context of cloud adoption in an intelligent manner that serves, in our case, what we're talking about today is a digital service deployment pursuant to good CX?
So when we work with an agency, our first step is a maturity assessment. And the maturity assessment is for the infrastructure, their solution, but also their workforce and their individual skill capabilities. As we build our solution, and while we do customize per agency, we also have a library of solutions that are proven to work and proven to succeed in the federal government, which is a very unique ecosystem that we can implement. And those covers reskilling and usually in parallel acquisition of skill sets from industry. Part of our mission as the Centers of Excellence is to partner with industry to support the government as we evolve, which means that a big part of what we do is facilitate acquisitions. We work with the partner agency, we work with their acquisition shop, and we work with GSA Acquisition Services, AAS, Assisted Acquisition Services, to bring the correct buy to the street at the right place so that we can make sure that the agency gets what they need, while at the same time working from the other side to make sure the agency is mature enough to accept what they just bought. Both of these are challenging, but we have been doing this at this point for 5 years, and we have some of the most brilliant acquisition minds that I've met sitting in our office, and they're really good at making sure that we have access to the right people. That's the short-term solution. The longer-term solution is working with the agency on workforce planning, which by itself is a long and complicated process, and we start to touch government HR, which is really hard to do. Generally speaking, I feel from my personal experience that most of the agencies that I've met are not as mature as, for example, USDA structure is. USDA is very large and has put a lot of effort into keeping up with the times, as well as any other government agencies I've seen. Other agencies, some of which I get to work on, let's transition you from working in your data centers, and other agencies we get to work on, you're using legacy technology that is no longer supported, and we now have a emergency redevelopment project that has to be done in 3 weeks. All of these have happened, and we do have templates, both solution, cloud solution that can be recreated, and acquisition to fairly quickly acquire the needs, so we can meet those needs at those unique timelines.
And that leads to a question about going from the idea of simply reusing a good idea, because as you pointed out early on, there's touch points that have to happen in the back end. Some of those are very similar regardless of the program. Have you been able, or are you thinking about bridging from replication of a solution to maybe sharing a solution That takes some acquisition work in the background and budgeting work in the background, but could really produce a lot of efficiency for digital services. Is that part of the thinking?
Absolutely. That's what we're trying to figure out at our sort of department level, working with our different mission areas, is where are those unique opportunities that we can harness and leverage kind of the collective
Those
brain power of
non-unique
department.
opportunities.
Right, yeah, and make more of them. And like one of the things that you mentioned, like sharing successes across agencies. Each of our mission areas or agencies a lot of times are running 100 miles an hour to kind of get the services out the door to the public. And so what we try to do with the headquarters area is try to bring those opportunities to gather people together to talk about their successes across the agency. One of the things that USDA is really proud about is we have 5 high impact service providers under the Customer Experience Executive Order. And each of those in a different mission area or agency are really doing amazing things to help prove that overall CX outcome on the back end, whether it's through technology, whether it's through people processing, whether it's through skills training. So what we really try to do at the department level is find those opportunities where we can share and leverage with one another what folks are learning and figuring out how can we have those conversations around opportunities at the beginning of developing a project or an idea versus, hey, we have this concrete amount of time, we have this concrete amount of money, we need to get the XYZ deliverable. We're really trying to meaningfully talk with a lot of our different partners in our budget office, in our legislative office, especially when it comes to renewing the Farm Bill. What are those different types of mechanisms that we can leverage to really help incentivize and drive that collaboration up front so that we can really harness the power of all the great successes across USDA, but like you said, create those mechanisms through funding, through enterprise-wide services, through information sharing that can really make that a lot easier and also incentivize our missionaries and agencies to do that at the very beginning stage of our process. Just with the pace of how many things our missionaries and agencies have to do, sometimes building that into a process can be really challenging, especially when you have concrete money you have to spend by a certain time period. So we're really looking at how can we build some of that innovation, collaboration, sharing as kind of the fabric of the DNA of what we do as technology in USDA, and how can we make that easier through the processes we have to follow with budget, capital planning, workforce, and others to really help bring a lot of those different pieces together. So at the end, it's not 8 mission areas coming up with 8 different solutions to do something very similar. It's coming up to figure out how can you get everybody again to that same quality digital base so that no matter which member of the public is coming to which area of USDA, they're getting a unified, unique, high quality service at the end of the day.
So Adam, is it a function then of shared containers or shared services, using shared containers to create similar services?
Depends
That's
on...
really getting into cloud weeds here, but that's what we're here to do today.
So containerization is a technology that we've used repeatedly, and we have used container images repeatedly between partner agency. But when you're trying to establish a shared service within the federal government, your challenge, and I'm just going to repeat this again, is always about data sharing. Agencies can share data internally. The structure of a solution is something that we do that we share on regular basis and we reuse on regular basis. One of my personal favorite is the Enterprise Data Service, which is essentially a wrapper around data sources that is pushed out. USDA is working a fantastic version of their own of the same concept. Once the data is there, you have to justify sharing that information internally inside the agency and justify sharing the information across agencies, and that is intentionally a heavy lift to ensure the safety of public data, to ensure the safety of government data. We are very, very careful about how that sharing happens. So we established this EDS concept in a couple of agencies. Some of them we just found them waiting for us. We can't connect them, and it's not that we can't connect them because we don't want to or it's technically difficult. We can't connect them because the risk of exposing that information is too high to justify.
But if people are sharing a service, can't you logically make sure that the data here doesn't end up with the data there and vice versa, yet they're still using the same services, even if different data?
In some places, you can see that in government. For example, if you apply to a student loan today, you can import your data from the IRS. That is a very well done system, and the interaction with them, the interaction between those two organizations is beautifully set up, and it relies on a single identity provider, which happens to be login.gov, which is part of TTS, our parent organization. We generally offer a variety of shared services across the federal government. The challenges around these, cloud.gov, search.gov, login.gov, is that each agency is responsible to the public for the information that they hold. Asking them to trust GSA with that data is unreasonable and generate risks in the wrong places. So the technical solution have to facilitate the partner agency ownership of their data, and then expose that data either to the public or to other agencies via very well managed search services. This is, from an engineering perspective, it's one of the most technically complex challenges and has been well resolved in some cases.
All right, so we're getting there. Well, in the time we have left, let me ask you this. Is there any job left for the data center in all of this?
I would say absolutely. I mean, especially at USDA, where we have a lot of our legacy systems that are older, and we have those data stewards, those policies that we have to make sure to maintain. Transitioning those and figuring out how to modernize those is not an easy task in a lot of different places. And it's also trying to figure out, what's the best cost utilization for maintaining our data. So I think data centers, they still have value, they still have use, and especially where I've seen it is when folks are being very intentional about what a modernization journey looks like. That's not just flipping off a switch and all the data centers are gone. There's a lot of time and attention that takes place in order to understand how are we best moving data from one service to another, how are we doing it in a way that meets records requirements that we have by law to maintain and safeguard and protect that data. A lot of places,
there's always that.
Yeah, absolutely. Across the government, there are numbers of different types of data that the public trusts us to safeguard and protect. And how are we doing that in a way when we're modernizing that we're able to modernize and still safeguard that data the way that we're legally required to? As Adam is saying, that is no easy feat. And there are a lot of really great experts across government really trying to figure out how to do that at scale and really trying to understand where the value for data centers still are in a lot of those different modernization journeys. Because especially for a lot of these different government systems, they interact and affect millions of people. So when you're trying to modernize to get from A to Z, you have to be really intentional and agile about how you're doing that step by step, so that you're not suddenly just switching on a different service on a day and then something happens and the whole sort of system shuts down. It's how do you be intentional with that modernization journey? How do you map out kind of what that data looks like from sitting at the data center to potentially going in the cloud? And especially from a data security standpoint, how are you mapping out and documenting that process of how that happened so that you can show the public that we're doing everything that we need to safeguard and protect that data while also making it accessible. The important thing about the Data Act is, any data that is public should be public by default, and making sure that data is accessible and shareable is critical, especially for organizations like USDA that we partner with so many different colleges and universities on a ton of different research and development across agriculture, that the data sets that we have for those and share with our university partners just spurs all of that information and really needs to make sure that they're in places that can be safeguarded, protected, but then also easily accessible to the hundreds of thousands of researchers that we partner with every day.
Okay, and how do you help, Adam, client agencies, to understand their costs and to make sure that you have to have this elasticity of demand, because some digital services are not 24 hours. They're weekly, they're daily, they're seasonally, and balancing that availability and cost, because that seems like a major challenge in the cloud.
It is. Scalability is a feature and a risk. We've worked with multiple agencies where the conversation started with, we had these $300,000 bills last month and we don't know why. And that is a good place to start the conversation. I'm happy to say that hasn't happened in a few years. People are becoming more careful about that.
Now they're down to 30,000 at a time instead of 300,000.
The process that you described was very, very You did all of my job for me. That is what we do with federal agencies. We start talking to an agency, identify what it is that they're trying to achieve, and then it's up to my team, the cloud team and the data team, to break it out into how it can be done, how it can be done safely, what parts of it can we move into the cloud. And a lot of the work that we do specifically about those unexpected expenditures is hunt down and help the CIO show up govern multiple cloud instances. The practical situation is most agencies would have multiple cloud instances. Some of them are better managed than others. Some of them the CIO shop is aware of. Some of those are owned by business end of things. We help them hunt them, manage them, accomplish appropriate governance. And then we get to work with them on here's how we can predict your costs and here's how we can predict your usage. This is a very customizable process. It has to be because each federal service is just different enough to require that level of customization.
And getting back up to the level of digital services, of course, you have to measure what's going on, and there's lots of metrics. Is that enabled by cloud, the measurement and delivery of metrics, so that you can control your program, find out where the pain points or the bottlenecks are, and fix them?
I would say absolutely. At USDA, we're a really data-driven organization, and for a lot of our products and services, our leadership is asking for real-time data in terms of how many applications have been submitted, how many have been processed, how much grant money is out the door by a particular period of time. So our leadership, they use that every day to kind of help understand how we're doing. And I think a lot of our systems that have moved to the cloud or have built, their infrastructure in the cloud, it really enables to do that in a way that is feasible, where you can go on and log on, the morning, and then in the afternoon you see a data pool of, 5,000 applications were submitted today across the country, and this is what it looks like total. Like that real-time data-driven decision making is super important for a lot of our different products and services, because like we said, a lot of times those inputs really affect all the different touch points and outputs behind the scenes to make sure, do we have enough staff on hand to be able to review those applications? Do we have enough folks on hand to be able to reach out if something needs corrected in an application? Making sure that we have all of the different staffing and needs on the back end to really help meet that front end experience that folks are having. And so I really think where a lot of agencies have adopted cloud, that interoperability and that speed at which they can collect and have really good reliability and validity on that data has been really impactful in terms of how quickly they can deploy their teams and staff to actually run the service at the end of the day and get to those better outcomes in a way where previously, years ago, it may be, hey, you can only do a data pool maybe one every couple of days, or then you had to do a data pool, but then you had to check and validate, and that would take another 4 to 6 hours of someone else's time to kind of validate. Where I've seen a lot of these transitions to the cloud and the way that people have been able to make their communication and systems interoperable, it really automates and streamlines a lot of that so that we're getting really good quality data and metrics to the right people at the right places at the right time, to able to deliver the service much better to the customer at the end of the day.
So Adam, sounds like that's, and you tell me if I'm correct here, part of your consultative work with agencies is the life cycle of operation of applications and not simply getting it to the cloud initially.
Yes, so we are, as facilitators, our job is to identify one of these use cases and then work with the agency both to build the initial thing, can be a product, can be a service, and carry that service to production. That hump is a challenge for federal government. There's security challenges that come with going live. There's budgetary challenges that come with going live. The way that you fund cloud has changed drastically in the government over the last 5 years. We are much better as federal government at doing agile acquisition and therefore agile funding of services. But establishing that with agencies that aren't there yet takes time. Our job is to work with CIO, CDO shops and carry them through that process, occasionally helping them build cloud governance, helping them build what cloud ATO process is. All of these are unique challenges that are still ongoing in the federal government.
I'm going to give you each 60 seconds more. We'll start with you, Adam. Where do you think this is all going to look like? What's this going to look like? Digital services, cloud enabled, in say the next 1, 2, 3 years?
I think we're going to see a lot more adoption across governments. So the situation where we have to create the foundation of governance should become less common. We've seen this change is already ongoing. It is likely that we're going to see a lot more automation of infrastructure management and infrastructure deployment. The government is getting more comfortable with agile acquisition, therefore scalable services, and we should be able to focus more on delivering improvement in customer experience and less on rebuilding the infrastructure, reinventing the wheel over and over again.
Arianne, final word?
I agree absolutely with Adam. I think there's going to be, because there's going to be more and more knowledge and awareness of how to leverage the cloud, and particularly in acquisitions and agile acquisitions, to be able to do pieces of it at a time. I think we're really going to see that those faster services and outcomes where there's a grant program that has to be stood up, that time that it takes to stand that up and get grant money out the door, I think is going to be greatly reduced. I think the expectations of the public are not going to slow down at all in terms of what the public expects from us to deliver to them on a digital format. And I think because of the maturity that we're starting to see in agencies, because of the knowledge and awareness that folks are having in terms of how to leverage and use the cloud and how to adopt the cloud and both bring skill sets of people inside the agency that can manage it appropriately and also really leverage our industry partners, I think we're really going to see this really neat combination of better outcomes, better service, and different ways that folks are buying tech and leveraging tech in government that is going to be a lot different than
Sure.
what we've seen in the past 5 or 10 years. And at the end of the day, all of that knowledge, that collaboration is going to lead to better services for the people at the public at the end of the day and help reestablish and maintain the trust that the public has in us to deliver a lot of these services that for many are so critical to their livelihood and is what we come to the office every day to do and figure out how can technology make that work better.
All right, good place to leave it. Thank you both very much for a great discussion. My guests have been Adam Grandt-Nesher. He is Director of Cloud Adoption and Infrastructure Optimization Center of Excellence for the General Services Administration, and Arianne Gallagher-Welcher. She's the Executive Director of the USDA Digital Service. I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin. You're watching Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on our Cloud Exchange.